Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us at today's program, presented as part of the Wignall Museum's Home Edition, a series of curated artist talks, workshops, and discussions featuring artists and cultural workers. My name is Rebecca Trawick. I'm the director and curator at the Wignall Museum. The Wignall Museum is a teaching museum and interdisciplinary art space that introduces Chaffey College students, faculty, staff, and community members to innovative contemporary art objects and ideas. By fostering critical thinking, visual literacy, discourse, and empathy, the museum seeks to enhance the intellectual and cultural life of our community. We want to take a moment to recognize that we're situated on the Rancho Cucamonga campus of Chaffey College, which resides on the traditional and unceded lands of the Tongva people. We offer our respect to the elders, both past, present, and future.
Hello, my name is Roman Stallenwerk. I'm the assistant curator at the Wignall Museum. Please visit our website at www.chaffey.edu/Wignall.
And hello, everyone. My name is Andy Hadel. I'm the preparator at the museum. Let me give you a quick breakdown of today's program. Here in a moment, we're going to have Danielle Giudici Wallis present for about 30 minutes. And then with the remaining time, as Roman had mentioned, we're going to do some Q&A, and you can leave those questions in the chat.
Great, thanks Roman and Andy. So we're really thrilled to have our friend and colleague Danielle with us today. So let me share her bio and then we'll start a presentation. So Danielle Giudici Wallis is the sole proprietor of Giudici Handcrafted, a bespoke footwear company based in Redlands, California. She designs and makes custom, made-to-measure footwear, one shoe at a time. Trained as an artist with a BA in visual arts from Antioch College and an MFA from Stanford University, she applies her knowledge and skills into creating handmade footwear. She believes in the importance of shifting our culture of consumerism towards slow fashion, which values the quality of construction, the durability of materials, and timeless designs. So please join me in welcoming Danielle.
So thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and hopefully provide some insight. It seems really weird through the screen, but I will do my best. And we can always switch over to a more live demo if you want. All right, so let's go ahead. Shoemaking 101. So I wanted to start and talk a little bit about the tools. There's a lot of really specific tools for shoemaking. These are sort of my favorite things so far. I wound up, it's funny when you start shoemaking, there's just like so many materials and tools to gather. And I think that we get a little overwhelmed and those of us who are tool obsessed get a little carried away, but you find that just like you have your favorite clothes, you have your favorite tools that you always go back to and wind up using the most of anything else. And the hammers on the right are my favorite. The one on the far left is a French hammer, and that's really used for like shaping once the shoe is on the last. Like you can pound the leather, and the leather is really malleable, and you can pound it to shape. You can pound out wrinkles, and it's got a nice face on it, so it's not gonna mar the upper. And then the little stubby one, that's kind of more of the workhorse, you know, when you're pounding on heels or nailing things. And then the rawhide mallet's used for when you're doing punching, so you don't mess up the end of your punches, or same thing like if you were doing woodworking with your chisels, you just want to protect the end of your tool so that you're not splaying it all out. And then on the right side are some different types of knives. The two on the left are my favorite knives. They're Japanese skiving knives, and skiving is an operation where you're thinning the leather where it joins so that the total thickness would equal the thickness of one piece. So each piece is skived down halfway, and then those two are put together, and you don't get a big lumpy piece of leather there. The circular knife is it's a traditional knife called a round knife, and you can use it in all sorts of ways, but I was using it mostly for what's called clicking, which is cutting out pattern pieces. And apparently they called it clicking because before the Industrial Revolution started, they would make these pattern pieces and they would edge them with like some kind of metal. And so the knives would make a little clicking sound when they were cutting out the leather. So they lay the pattern on top of the leather and cut around it. And that's why it was called a clicking knife. The green handle one's just kind of a general purpose tool. And then the one with the little funny lip is actually a lip knife. And you can go around the edge of your sole, and that way you don't catch the upper. So, but I've actually, you wind up making your own tools a lot too, or modifying them to suit your own purposes. So I wound up really sharpening that in a way that I can use it when I'm carving the sole. And we'll see that a little bit later. These are some other, we have the punch on the rotary punch on the left, and dividers, and that's really for marking the sole. You can use it for marking stitching, and obviously the punch for making your holes for eyelets, grommets. And then on the right side are the awls, and it's hard to tell from the photo, but they're oriented differently. So one is used for welting, and the other one is used for sewing the soles on, the outsoles, because one goes in and sort of goes flat, so you have room to bring a double needle through, whereas the other one, it goes, the one goes this way, the other one sort of vertical through there. And even though you're still bringing through two needles, it's oriented differently because it lines up the stitching in a different way for the outsole. And then the other one is a pegging awl. So a lot of times older shoes, they had, they actually would make the hole with the pegging awl and then use wooden pegs. And that was kind of well, in some places it's still more traditional. I think in Austria, they used to make pegged shoes more than welted shoes. And we'll get to that in a little bit. And these are really the workhorses. The one on the left is my favorite set of pliers. These are all called lasting pliers. And you use them when you're pulling the upper over the last. The last is the shoe form. So the last is this form. And then when you're pulling the upper, so this is an upper. It's a shoe that hasn't been lasted yet. And what happens is that upper gets pulled over this form, and you use these lasting pliers to really pull it in place. It holds it, and then you have a hammer at the same time. So it's like a combination pliers and hammer. And that allows you to really keep the upper in place while you're moving around the shoe. And some of them are more narrow. So like when you get to the toe, it's nice to have these little teeny ones where you can, because you need a lot of nails when you get to those curves, just to bunch the leather up in a way that it's not going to show wrinkles. And it's similar to stretching a canvas, where you kind of go back and forth and all around, because you want to keep that tension the same, and you want to be able to, not have that. It has to be, situated on the last correctly, or it's not gonna fit. It's gonna look weird. And then the lasts. So the interesting thing about lasts is that, they come in these different shapes. Like this is a high heel last. It's very narrow. I don't know who could wear this, but it's from a flea market. Somebody gave it to me. But you can't. So some shoes, well, all shoes, all lasts, they have what's called a toe spring. So here's another one. And toe spring is that the way the shoe goes up, and that situates the shoe so that when you have the heel on, your toe's not going to be dragging to the ground, right? So you have this little toe spring. And lasts are made for certain heel heights. So you couldn't change the heel height to be like a high heel on this one. And that's why you get this really different looking curve on this one. And in the early days of shoemaking, they didn't have right foot or left foot. They only had what's called straight lasts. And so people just wore it didn't matter if it was your right or left, you just wore the same shoe on there. So the first step in the process is really working with clients to take their foot measurements. And an example here. So you're basically asking people to stand on a piece of paper and you're tracing their foot, and then you're measuring around these certain parts of the foot. The most important measurement is that ball measurement where your big toe joint and your little toe joint and across there. And that's like super key. And then also your heel measurements, everything sort of triangulates to give you a good fit. So having all these measurements done well and consistent, and everybody does it in a slightly different way. The key is to start to be consistent with it. And I've been doing this for almost 3 years now. In March, it'll be 3 years. And it's still like, sometimes I still get frustrated with it. Measuring, it's just, it's an art form in itself. Oh, here's some other drawings. So you use a flexible tape measure to go around the foot, and there's all kind. I'm learning more and more about foot anatomy and trying to understand orthotics and pedorthic conditions, and a lot of people that want handmade shoes are people that have conditions that, you know, they can't find a off the shelf shoe that will fit and be comfortable. So a lot of it is really trying to understand what their issues are, whether it's, you know, bunions or different things in terms of flexibility with their toes, how to make the shoe stiffer, how to make it more flexible. There's all sorts of different issues that I'm trying to understand. And lately I've started also carving my own lasts, which may be a little insane. Usually you can buy last off the shelf, and they have different types of lasts. So some of them have joints like this. This one's a solid last. This one has a joint. This one I've carved, and it actually has, it's cut right here on the bandsaw, and there's a screw here holding it. And the reason why they are built this way is so that you can remove this is called the cone. You can remove the cone of the last and get the shoe, or get the last out of the shoe, which isn't always an easy task, because you basically form fit this leather, and then you've got this really stiff object that you're trying to remove. Whereas your foot, it's flexible, it can move, it can come out of the shoe easily. But it's always like a challenge to pull the last. And there's a saying, it says the last comes first, because you need to translate those measurements from the drawings onto the last and make sure all of those measurements line up, and those kind of landmarks of the joint and the heel and the short heel and the long heel, everything has to kind of line up with the measurements in order for the fit to be good. So once you have the last shaped the way you want it, there's different ways to do this, and they used to use just paper, but one way to do it now, which is very easy, just dropped a bunch of stuff, is to go ahead and you tape that last with masking tape. This one I used paper underneath so that I could then pull it off, and you can draw directly on the last, making sure, you know, you have those major points like the joint marked, and you design the pattern around those landmarks, and you You can, I don't know if you can see, so you can get really detailed with your drawing and decide, oh, I want broguing, and you can add all that to the pattern. The toe cap, everything can be drawn on the taped version, and then you remove that and you take that and you tape it down onto, or you actually just peel it up and you plop it down on a piece of paper. And you can transfer, actually here's the piece of tape. You peel it off, you cut it down the center, right? So you've got basically what's half the shoe, and you put it on paper, and then you can put that on top of, you can translate that into a drawing, right? So you're taking this 3D form, you're transferring it to 2D, and then you're drawing out your pattern in a 2D situation. And then once you've got that, you can make your pattern pieces from that. So this is, drop the other ones, but like this is part of the pattern. This is the lining. So all your pattern pieces are made from that drawing.
Danielle, can I interject and ask a question here? So in this image, so we see the drawing on paper, we see the pattern cut out in the front of the image. And then is that a last with a pattern on top of it?
No, that's the taped. So that's actually a hollow.
Oh, okay.
This thing.
Okay.
Actually hollow. So this is the last for that shoe. So yeah, it's really big feet. But it just fits right over that. So you can see. So then once you've got all your pattern pieces, you're cutting things out, which is called clicking, like we talked about. And so with the boot, you have a lot of pieces to put together. You know, it just depends on what style of shoe, how many pieces you have. I mean, a lot of people have started making sneakers, and all those little bits that go on sneakers, everything has to be cut separately and all has to be skived. So when you're skiving, like I said, those are my favorite knives, right? And you're using those to just bevel that edge, and you can either do a narrow skive or a wider skive depending on what you need. And here, I think this is the piece that goes right here on the end of the shoe. So that would be more of a narrow skive. But then if you see the folded edge, that you need a wider skive, because you're gonna, in order to give kind of a nice finished edge, you can fold over the material and it just gives you a nice smooth finished edge. And one of the things that was really challenging was just learning to sharpen knives and keep them really sharp, because if they're not sharp, they really distort the leather and stretch it out. And then you wind up cursing at yourself, starting over. So it starts out with, when you're building the shoe, you start out, you have to cut sole leather, and sole leather is about a 1/4 inch thick. So it's really heavy to cut out. And then you shape it. So there's that curve that we talked about, and some people have more of a curve on the bottom of their foot. And like if you've ever had orthotics made, like some people, they'll actually have like a super curve here on the heel. So anyway, the leather gets wet, and you soak it, and then you let it sort of temper, and it softens up. And you can either use, some people use bicycle tubes and wrap them around, but I wind up using nails because it dries quicker, because the rubber is not holding in the moisture. So that's all just molded basically to the bottom of the last, and then it's trimmed down to match the shape. And then once that's done, I'm using my dividers there to mark the edge, and this is called carving the hold fast. And this is a very traditional way of making shoes. Some people will only carve the upper part, and the heel part they'll leave in a different configuration, which is actually on this piece. I did this where you leave this part a little bit thicker, and it's still sewn, but it's not going to be welted. So the welt would end here. So it's carved around, and there's sort of a ridge, and what happens is I'm using my my lip knife there that I've sharpened in a specific way to be able to cut that out, and that creates this hold fast piece, which will then get punctured the awl. And so the awl will go through and pre-puncture all of those holes that the welt will be sewn on with. And it's just, some people pre-puncture, some people don't. I find it much easier to do that because it's sort of, otherwise you're working a little bit blind, because once you pull the upper over that, that rib that you've created, it's hard to see obviously where you're coming out on the other side. Closing, which is sewing the uppers. This is before it gets all put together. It's, I don't know why they call it closing, but they do. And it used to be done apparently in sort of pre-industrial times. A lot of the women did all the closing at home. So they worked in sewing machines at home, just like making uppers, sewing the uppers, and it was piecework, and they get paid for the piecework, and then they'd send it off into the shop, and then the shoemaker would take the upper and do the lasting and finishing on it. So, and everybody in the old days used to do a different job, because the designers or whoever ran the factory, they didn't want people to have the knowledge of all the different steps, because then they could open their own shop if they knew all those steps. So it's very siloed, like one person did this, one person did that, and each step was kind of a different specialty. So lasting, once you've got your upper sewn, you're putting your upper on top of the shoe, and you've got 2 layers. You've got, actually you've got 3 layers. You've got the lining, and that gets lasted first. That's the lining all lasted. And then on top of that, you have a toe puff. So there's a thicker piece of material. It's a veg tan leather. This is actually going to be a heel stiffener. So you can see it's a little bit pre-shaped. I stretched it around the form. With the toe puff, after the lining is lasted, you take that toe puff and you last that, and that needs to dry completely, because what happens then is it gets sanded down and shaped, because it can really, even though it's just a thin piece of leather, it's only like 2 to 3 ounce veg tan leather, it can still change the toe unless it's really shaped. So you want to spend some time and feather it out and make sure it meets your final vision. And then once that's done, then you last the upper. And again, using your lasting pliers, going all the way around the shoe and pulling everything tight and pulling out all the wrinkles. And it just, again, it takes like more nails around the toe, more nails around the heel, to get that nice and smooth. And then those nails are pounded down. So that just holds your upper in place. And some people will remove the nails after they pound them down. It does get glued, so it'll stay with the contact cement. It gets glued, and then you can pound them down and remove them, or you can pound them down and then remove them as you go with the welting process. So remember, we carved that channel, so that channel's in there, and now you're going back through, you're going through the channel, through the lining on the upper, into this little strip, which is called the welt. And that welt gets sewn on all the way around the shoe. So this is the shoe being welted. So you can see that's kind of sticking out, and that provides a sewing surface when you put the sole on the other side. So a lot of times if you see stitching around your shoe, a lot of times it's fake, but in this case it's not. So that's all sewn on. And it's a really lengthy process. It's very physically demanding. You find there's like weird muscles that you never knew existed in your shoulders. It's also like shoemaking's got to be the worst thing for your posture because you're always like this, hunched over. But it's really satisfying when you get done. A lot of people, like I used to hate this part the most, and now I kind of enjoy it. Like you have to be really meditative about it. But sometimes it's really hard to find that hole, and it takes a really long time to stitch the welt all the way around. So once that's all the way on, you'll see there's it's because of that channel, it can create a hollow. And you also have a shank that you put in there, which is a metal piece. They're metal or wood shanks. This is a wood shank. And that just provides support in between where your heel is. It's basically a little bridge to give you support there. So once that shank is in and it gets covered with a piece of leather and cork fills in here so that you get a nice flat surface all the way across, and it gets sanded down nice and smooth. And then you're going to attach the outsole, and basically, again, it's just a piece of thick, hardy leather that gets glued on and then trimmed down all the way around to match. And you'll have, it's going to be glued to the welt as well as the bottom of the shoe. And then that'll be stitched on. And there's that special awl for stitching. And there's also a tool, actually, I didn't, where'd it go? Sorry, I can't find it. But it's a little rotary tool that will mark where your stitches are. And they come in different stitches per inch. So a lot of like super fine high-end shoes, they'll sew as many as like 16, 32 stitches per inch, which is just insane. I'm good if I get like 6, but I'm happy with 4 most of the time. So it just, you know, it's like the European tradition is like to have lots of stitches per inch, but I make a rougher shoe. And then once you're done with the stitching and you have the outsole on, and you start to build the heel. And so there's different ways to do it. Some people, you can buy like pre-stacked leather, it's glued together, and you can nail that on, or you can build your own stack, and you can do that in place. And some people, again, it depends on how you learned, but you can build it up. You can glue a layer and build it up, and another layer and another layer until you've got your heel height that you're looking for. And then these are just some samples of shoes that I've done. The green boots are a stitch down method. So instead of lasting it, they actually get glued down to the what's called a midsole. So there's, instead of having the welt, there's a midsole, and it gets glued down to that, and then it gets stitched to the midsole. And then there's another layer, that's the outsole. And then of course the heel building after that. And then the one on the right, they're more of a traditional style, like I've been explaining. Actually, I think they were this one. And then these are some, on the left, some sandals that I just did. They were called my California Chopines. Chopines were a shoe that was very popular in Venice, and people would, I guess the height of the Chopin related to the level of nobility. So, but they got to be ridiculous in terms of height. And women had to use like walking sticks to steady themselves as they walked. But platforms have been around for a really long time, which I thought was super interesting. And you know, I think they reached really the height of their popularity in Venice. And then they even passed laws about how high they can be because they were problematic. Okay, is there questions?
Thanks, Danielle. That was what a treat to see your whole process through. Thank you so much. So yeah, we absolutely have some questions. Maybe I can start with one, and then I think Andy has a series of questions from Jason that we'll ask, or Jay. But as we learned from your bio, right, your background is in studio practice work, right, as an artist. And so I'm just curious how your studio practice informs shoemaking. I mean, I think obviously they're all sculpture, you know, you made sculptures, these are sculptural forms, but it'd be interesting to hear what you think about that.
Well, I think that's why I was drawn to last making, because it's certainly not the most economical way to go about things, but it really appealed to me. And actually, I found out after I started shoemaking that my great grandfather and my great uncle were both employed as last makers, and they were immigrant Italian last makers and shoemakers, but they worked doing last making. So I was drawn to that. I started, I mean, I think I always wanted to make shoes, and I don't know where it came from. If it was just like really experiences out. My grandmother, I think because my great grandfather was a shoemaker, my grandmother knew this guy Charlie. I can't remember his name now, but they had a shoe shop, and we would go there and always visit with Charlie. And I think that sort of started some spark early on, like my fascination with the big machinery and everything, and all the tools and the smells. It just smells really nice. The leather and I don't know. There's something about the whole ambiance of shoemaking. But I do think, you know, it's definitely sculptural. It moves back and forth, like in terms of, I guess I wanted to make more functional work, and that was part of the draw towards shoes as well. But now that I'm making more functional work, I want to make more unfunctional work. So I don't know if there's any happy medium there that I can find. But I think they definitely go back and forth.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions on behalf of Jason in the chat here. He has kind of a multiple part thing. Start off with, what are your thoughts on fast fashion versus slow fashion, particularly in women's fashion? Do you have anything to say there?
Yeah, no, I'm not a fan of fast fashion at all. Even my daughter, you know, she's been great about, even for me, like as a mom, you know, you sometimes go to the easiest thing. But we try to shop at thrift stores. We try to not, you know, take part in that ridiculous cycle that is fast fashion. As an artist and someone that never or rarely had a desk job, I was never big on clothes or clothes buying, so I was always more of a minimalist when it came to my wardrobe anyway. And I always felt like, you know, one pair of sturdy boots would suit me, and I'd be happy with that as long as they were comfortable. So yeah, I'm definitely in. So the quality is so much better. Like buying a few pieces that are really nice and well made, and a lot of times with thrift. And actually, I find it interesting now. Like there's so much fast fashion at thrift stores, but like if you can really find clothes that are from a different time period, like the quality of the clothes are amazing. Like really, truly vintage clothes are just so well made, and the materials are nicer. Everything better. I'm gonna try to go there.
Well, I hope that more people share your thoughts on that. I think going forward with his question, he says, I might be paraphrasing a little bit, but is it more difficult to shift women into buying more expensive and say expensive for the sake of sustainability? Or
That's interesting. So it's funny, most of my customers to begin with have been men. And I think men's shoes, you know, they're more traditional in terms of the style, right? There's the Oxford, there's the Derby, there's certain styles that are never going to go out of fashion. And so men are more willing to spend a little more to have a custom made shoe because they know it's not going to be like out of fashion in 6 months. I think women, I do think we're used to like sort of the turnover, and I was always a big shoe hound and buying shoes. And I had a real pinch for Doc Martens and all their different styles, which they lasted a long time, but they're definitely made in the factory. So I do think it's a different animal, but I think as I go, I'm trying to steer more women into that direction too. And I've always I like men's shoe styles, so I think a lot of women do, but it's hard to find those styles in women's sizes. So, offering that is one way to tempt people over to the more sustainable fashion.
So a couple questions from Sant. Do you want to make more art shoes? She was admiring your art shoe sculptures.
I do. I have a lot of ideas about that. This idea of landscape in shoes really appeals to me. And so I've been thinking in terms of that for a few other endeavors that way. So definitely.
And then have you had to learn about the anatomy of feet and the impact of shoes on the health of our bodies? I know you mentioned that a little bit, talking about orthopedics. Have you had to do your own DIY studying, or are you taking?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to go back to college for it. I go to a program for it, but it's hard with like having kids that you need to send to college first. So I gotta wait my turn again. But I have been doing some research. I like the Pedorthix books are really expensive though. I actually bought one for my birthday last year, and just this one book was like $150 because they're basically medical books. And to find a book, there are some books on shoemaking and Pedorthix, but the better resource, there's great stuff online. And if anybody's interested, there's one guy, Bill Bird, he's in England, and he's a shoemaker. He's an orthopedic shoemaker, and he has a YouTube channel. And he's done a few different series about orthopedic footwear, but he also did like a last making one. And I would love to go to England and study with him and just be an apprentice with him. But I think that's like the best way to learn, is to work with others who are doing it. But it's hard to find shoemakers around here.
So can I ask a follow-up to that? Since you mentioned apprenticing, can you tell us briefly about how you did learn some of the fundamentals and who you've apprenticed with?
Yeah, so I initially, there's a lot of places that will offer you, you can spend a week here and learn to make a pair of boots. And I did that almost 3 years ago now. I went to Flint, Michigan, and worked with a guy there. And he's just a small one-person shop bootmaker. And so I spent the week with him in Michigan in March. It's very cold there. But it was great, and I learned a lot from him. We basically built a pair of boots together, and then when I got back, I was struggling kind of on my own to keep going and to keep learning, and I tried to find somebody around here to learn from, which didn't go well. A lot of even just like a shoe repair shop, I was like, I'll come work for you, and they're like, no, you'll be in the way. There's kind of like this, they're very gruff, and it's tend to be male dominated. And I had seen what's it called? I can't remember the show, but it's like a ACET arts thing. and it was about crafts people in the LA area, and they featured Raul Ojeda, who runs Willie's Shoe Service. And so I called up Raul and basically was like, you know, can I come work for you, and can I learn from you? And he was reluctant, but gave in. And so I worked for him for about a year and was able to learn a lot. Like the guy who makes uppers for him, he's been making shoes since he was 11 years old, and he's 50 something now. So, I mean, just amazing to watch. Like, he's just like, it takes me weeks to do what he does in a morning. You know, he's just really talented.
I have another question from Jason in the chat. He asked if you worked with crepe shoes, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. Crepe soles, excuse me. He says he appreciates wallabies for this reason, that they can be resoled. Is that something that you've worked with?
So I looked into using crepe on those green desert boots, but apparently crepe doesn't hold up very well in the heat. And since this person actually lived in the desert, I thought that wouldn't be a good mix. And they do, so like the crepe, I've also seen it come through when I was working for Raul. I've seen it come through the shop. It gets really dirty, like it's super black and looks ugly after not a long time. So I tend to stay away from it just because I haven't been impressed with the way I've seen it wear. I feel like leather is much more durable, and then to put there's sole protectors you can put on, so like it's like a hardened rubber, and that gives you also the non-slip. So I tend to use just leather soles with a thin hard rubber on the bottom.
So Danielle, how long on average does it take you to create a pair of shoes or boots? And then what is the price range? What does that look like?
So it depends on the shoe, how long it takes me, and also the foot, which I'm learning. As I'm dealing with people that have more foot issues, it takes me a lot longer because we have to work through all those issues, right? And so basically I'm still on the learning stage, and even though, you know, they started around 700, I'm not making any money because it takes me so long to kind of work things out. If it was just going to be a standard shoe, like, oh, I want this lasts, I want this style, and I didn't have to do any customization, I could do it in like probably like 2 weeks. But because I do a lot of the customization and going back and forth with fittings, and it takes me a long time. So, and then like a lot of times I'll work on more than one pair at a time, which also makes the schedule a little wonky.
I want to kind of go back a little bit to your talk about tools. I'm kind of always fascinated myself with just the tools of a trade and how they are very specific. And it was really interesting seeing, you know, their hammers, like that tiny hammer. Like I want to take that home. Like I just want that little stubby hammer. But like the hammers, for instance, and gosh, I forgot what you called the special plier and hammer combo, that specific one. Yeah. Was it difficult to find these? You said it was difficult to find other shoemakers. It's difficult to find the tools, and which of those were you having to make yourself?
So the tools, you can still find it. You can find a lot on eBay, but there is a company in England that still makes tools. They're called George Barnsley, and they've been around forever. And my favorite, these are my favorite pliers because they have this little thing on the end, which makes it nice to hold. These are, a lot of them are made in England, and I went to a lot of flea markets when I was in Europe last winter, and I found some great hauls and things over there. But I do, like, I have a little wood lathe, so I'll turn handles for the awls, and I actually have been trying to learn how to temper the steel in a way. Like I bought tool steel so that I could shape my own awls, and then I'm trying to figure out how to temper it to make it strong enough, but I'm not quite there yet with the tempering process because it's, I mean, that's such a small amount of steel that getting those temperatures just right is really going to take a little practice. But there's a place in LA that does forge stuff, and I've been calling on them for some help, and they've been nice about giving me advice, and hopefully I go there because I'd love to make like even there's a lot of iron, like they're called shoe irons. Let's see, let's grab something. So there's these are, this is like a heel iron. So when you're working on a shoe on the heel, you can heat this up. There's like a little alcohol lamp and it lays on there. It heats up the iron, and then you can use that to like, you notice the edges of here. So this is a boot that I made for my husband, and you can see like how shiny it is on the heel. It's just stacked leather, but you have to really compress those fibers. So you're building up the waxes, and these are all like sanded down and use glass. Actually, glass is a really interesting tool. It's one of my favorites. It's so simple, but using a piece of glass, you break it in a certain way so that it creates a little round edge. As you can see, it's like slightly rounded, and when it's rounded like that, you can use it to scrape the leather, and it brings it to a really smooth finish. And then you take that iron and you can really compress those fibers more and get that shiny finish.
That's fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm like glass. Who knew?
Yeah, I'm sure your shop will never, you'll always be building your shop, I imagine. Finding new tools and equipment, right? So I can see why leather would be a really important material, but do you also use vegan varieties? Have you found any that work?
So I ordered some of the, I don't know if anybody's seen it. It's like a cactus based leather. And I ordered it and they were super sweet and they sent me all these samples, but it's so stretchy that it would be really hard to work with for shoes. I am eventually hoping to get a hold of the mushroom leather from MycoWorks. I can't remember what they call it, Reishi, R-E-I-S-H-I. But they're just dealing with companies and I think doing wholesale right now, but hopefully at some point we'll be able to get a hold of that because it's supposed to really have the same properties as leather. So I look forward to using that. And you can use fabric and just back it with leather. I mean, wouldn't be vegan. But I haven't done any fabric shoes yet, but that's sort of on my list of to try out.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Jenny has a question. How are shoe soles recycled?
Well, if it's leather, so you can resole any of these welted shoes. You cut the stitches and you pull off the leather. Usually it's worn through. When people are getting them resoled, there's like not much left to the leather. So the leather's not recycled. That would be just trash. I mean, you can reuse bits of it for building up the last. Like a lot of times when you're rebuilding the last, you have to add patches because, oh, it's up here, or a little more space on the end. You can use those bits of leather to build up your last. But yeah, and then the rubber that gets put on the bottom, it's pretty thin. It's really just a sole protector and gives you a little grip, so it doesn't really get recycled, unfortunately.
So Danielle, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, once you pull off the sole, you can definitely use the same welt over and over again to sew on a new sole. So that makes them last longer. And eventually you can even replace the welt.
Super fascinating. So I have two final questions that we're asking all of our guests. So I'm wondering what you're currently watching, reading, listening to, etc., that's making you happy right now or feeling hopeful.
Queen's Gambit, which I think is fabulous.
Say it again.
Queen's Gambit. Did you watch that? It's
Oh, yes.
it's so good. I just finished that, and then I'm in a book group, and we just finished The Lying Life of Adults, which I didn't really like that much, which is Elena Ferrante book. But what else? So there's a space if anyone's really interested in shoes, there's a space in New York called Brooklyn Shoe Space. Well, it used to be a space. I think they actually went and took out. They gave up their shop space, but the woman that runs it, her name's Heiko. Keiko. I have a friend named Heiko. Her name's Keiko. He has been doing these shoe talks, and she's just been interviewing people from all over the country, and not only country, all over the world. And it's been really fascinating to hear about other shoemakers and their processes. So that's kind of been fun. It keeps me company while I'm working on food.
Excellent. Good.
It's a small little world, but it's kind of tightly connected. Like people know each other.
I bet. Well, you may have answered my next question already, but I was going to ask if there's an artist or craftsperson whose work you'd like to amplify and suggest that we all take a look at.
Yeah. What's her handle? Sabotus. It's she's on Instagram. Her name's Sarah Guerin, and she's a cowboy boot maker. And I met her at a last making workshop in New York at the Brooklyn Shoe Space. And her Instagram is SAVOTEUSE. And I think she's just so talented. And I think she was trained as an architect and a shoemaker and an artist. She went to RISD. And I think she's pretty awesome. It's Sabotus Bespoke.
Can you, if you wouldn't mind putting Keiko and Sarah's names in the chat while we close out?
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, Danielle. What a pleasure to spend time with you and see your studio and see your tools and hear more about your process. This is the second time I'm hearing it, seeing it, but every time I learn a little bit more. And like Andy, your tools are really fascinating. So thank you so much. And thanks everybody for attending today. We appreciate it. Please note today's video will be transcribed. So visit our website to view the video and all past episodes from Home Edition. And we also ask that all attendees complete a quick survey that will help us to evaluate our online programming and plan for the future. And yeah, thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it. Hopefully it was a nice break from your usual schedule today. So thanks everybody. Thank you so much, Danielle. We appreciate you.
Thanks everybody for showing up. Appreciate it. It's nice.
Our pleasure. Thank you.